Have you ever been writing your book and everything's flowing really nicely, and then one day you sit down and realize you have absolutely no idea where your story is going? Not in a panicked, stuck way, but in a deeper, more unsettling way. Like a thread you were following has simply vanished, or like you can't quite remember what made this story feel worth writing in the first place. That's not a sign that your story is broken or that you're a bad writer. It's one of the most common experiences that writers have. And today, I'm going to give you a simple 3-question compass to help you find your way back without throwing out everything that you've already written. So stay with me. This episode might be exactly what your manuscript's been waiting for. If you feel called to write a book, but writer's block, procrastination, and self-doubt keep pulling you from the page, you're not alone, and you're not meant to stay stuck. Hi, I'm Madison Michaels, author and life coach, and I've created this podcast as a creative space grounded in faith and mindset transformations to help you break through your blocks, gain creative clarity, and finally finish the book you're meant to write. So grab your cup of liquid gold and let's write the darn book together. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Write the Darn Book. I'm your host, Madison Michaels, and today we're talking about something that doesn't get nearly enough airtime. That feeling of being completely lost inside a draft that you've already been working on for weeks or months. We're going to look at why it happens, what it actually means when it does, and I'm going to walk you through my 3-question story compass so you can get your bearings and find your way back to the heart of your story. Here's something I want you to consider. Most writing advice talks about writer's block as if it only happens at the beginning. You know, that blank page, the cursor blinking, the paralysis before you've even started. But there's another version of being stuck that's far less discussed. And in my experience as both an author and a writing coach, it's far more common, and that is the mid-draft drift. You've been writing, you've got pages, maybe even chapters. The story exists, and somewhere in the middle of all that momentum, the thread quietly disappears. You're still writing words perhaps, maybe, if that, but they feel disconnected, maybe a little hollow, like you're just filling space rather than building your story. Or maybe you've stopped writing entirely because every time you open the document, something feels a little off and you can't name what it is. This is what I call losing the emotional core of your story. And it's not the same as writer's block. Writer's block is about not being able to write. This is about losing your sense of why you're writing this particular story in this particular way for this particular reason. And when that why goes quiet, the whole story starts to feel like someone else's work. Writers drift from their story's emotional core for all sorts of reasons. And I find that the reason tends to be quite specific to who you are as a writer. Some writers drift because life gets busy, and when they come back to the manuscript after a break, they never quite re-anchor themselves to it. Some drift because they've followed a plot thread that seemed exciting in the moment, but it took them somewhere that didn't feel true to the story's heart. Some, particularly the more analytical and structured writers, drift because they're so deep in the craft and the chapter structure, the pacing and the dialogue mechanics of the story, that they've actually lost sight of the feeling or the heart of the story underneath it all. And some drift because a newer, shinier idea has been quietly stealing that creative energy that belongs to the current manuscript. And sometimes, honestly, it's because the story has grown and shifted since you first began writing it, and the version of the story that you're writing now is actually different from the version that you set out to write. That's not failure. That's a living, breathing story. But it does mean you need to stop and recalibrate. And the good news is this: the story isn't gone and the thread isn't destroyed. It's just waiting for you to pick it back up. And today I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. First though, I want to share something with you from my own writing experience that I think will land. There was a chapter in one of my manuscripts, and I won't tell you which one, that I simply couldn't write. I knew what was supposed to happen. I'd outlined it. I'd thought about it. I knew the scene. But every time I sat down to write it, it just came out wrong. It was flat and lifeless, like I was transcribing events rather than bringing that story and that scene to life on the page. I rewrote the opening paragraph no fewer than probably 6 times, if not more, and every version felt that I was moving furniture around in an empty room. Just something was missing and I couldn't figure out what. And it was my editor, bless her, who finally said the thing that cracked it open. She read the previous 3 chapters and she said, "Madison, I think you've lost the why." And I sat there with that because I immediately knew she was right. What had happened was this: somewhere about 20 pages earlier, I'd made a small craft decision. I'd shifted a scene for some pacing reasons and swapped around the order of a couple of events to tighten a few things up. And all of that made structural sense, which really appealed to my owl inside me. But what it had actually done was it had shifted the emotional truth that was powering the whole story. And I hadn't even noticed that because I was thinking about the craft and the mechanics of the book rather than the actual heart of it and what I had originally been trying to relay with it. I'd stopped asking, what does this mean? Instead, I'd only been asking, how does this work? When I went back and reconnected with the deeper why of that chapter, what was really at stake emotionally for my characters, what this moment meant in the arc of the whole story, and what feeling I wanted the reader to leave the chapter with, the words came back. Not immediately, but within a session or 2, the chapter started to breathe again and feel alive again. And that experience taught me something that I haven't forgotten. Craft can drift from emotion without you even noticing. And when it does, you don't need to rewrite everything. You just need to find your way back to the heart of your story. What I'm going to give you today is something I call the 3-question story compass. 3 questions that cut underneath the craft and get straight to the emotional engine of your story. You can answer them in your journal, in a voice memo, or in a quiet 10 minutes before you open the manuscript. The point isn't to write more scenes right now. The point is to remember what you're building and why it matters. The first question that I want you to ask yourself is, what is my character most afraid of losing? Not plot afraid, emotionally afraid. At the deepest level of this story, what does your protagonist stand to lose that they can't bear to lose? It might be a relationship. It might be their sense of identity. It might be safety or belonging or the life they've built or the dream they've been carrying. It might be something they haven't even admitted to themselves within the story. This question matters because fear of loss is the engine of almost every story that truly works. When a reader feels what a character has to lose, they become invested. They turn pages. They stay up way too late trying to read and see what happens. And when you, as the writer, lose sight of what your character is most afraid of losing, your scenes start to feel like furniture arrangement rather than emotional storytelling. So ask yourself right now, what does my character stand to lose? Not what will happen to them, but what are they most afraid of having taken away? Write it down. Be specific. Don't let yourself off the hook with a general answer. She's afraid of losing everything. That is too vague to be useful. It needs to be specific. Perhaps she's afraid of losing the only person who has ever made her feel important or worth something. That's an engine, and that's something you can write from. The second question I want you to ask yourself is, what feeling do I want my reader to leave this story with? Not the plot resolution, the feeling. So when someone finishes your book and closes the cover and just sits there for a moment after reading, what do you want them to be feeling in their body? Hope, grief, the ache of something beautiful and complicated, the fierce, warm certainty that love is worth it, the unsettling sense that the world is a strange and mysterious place than what they'd thought. What's the emotional residue you want to leave behind? This question is important because it gives you a compass point for every scene you write. And when you know the emotional destination of your story, you can start to ask yourself, does this scene move me towards that feeling or away from it? Is this chapter contributing to the emotional arc or is it decorating around it? A lot of mid-draft drift happens because writers are following plot logic without connecting it back to the emotional logic. Plot is how your story moves, but emotion is why the story matters, and you need both. But when you've lost your way, it's almost always the emotional logic that's gone quiet. Question 2 helps you bring it back. Now, the last question is, what is this story really about? Not the plot, the theme, the deeper thing. Every story worth reading is about something beyond its surface events. A story about a woman solving a Victorian murder mystery might really be about whether the truth is always the cost of knowing it. A story about a duke and a spinster in a marriage of convenience might really be about whether someone who's been told they're unlovable can learn to believe otherwise. A story about a writer trying to finish their book might really be about learning to trust yourself. And when you know what your story is really about, when you can articulate the question at its heart, you have a filter. Every scene, every piece of dialogue, every character choice can be held up against that deeper question and asked, does this serve the theme or is it just noise? I want to be clear, this isn't about turning your story into a lecture or making every scene carry a moral. It's about knowing what you're saying. It's about having a clear compass point that keeps you orientated even when the specific path forward isn't yet clear. Stories drift when writers lose sight of what they're saying. Stories regain their thread when writers remember what they're building. Now, how do you use this compass? Well, once you've answered all 3 questions, do this. Go back to the last scene that you wrote before you started to feel lost. Read it. Then ask yourself, does this scene serve what my character is most afraid of losing? Does it move me toward the feeling I want my readers to leave with? And does it connect, even loosely, to what the story is really about? And if the answer is yes, you haven't drifted as far as you thought. You just need to trust the thread and keep moving. If the answer is no, though, or maybe not quite, you've found your recalibration point. You don't need to delete the scene. You might just need to add a layer to it, perhaps a moment of emotional truth or a shift in how a character internalizes what's happening around them. The 3-question compass doesn't fix your story for you. It gives you back your sense of direction so you can fix it yourself. And more often than not, once you remember where you're going, the writing comes back really quickly. And it's not because you've solved a plot problem, but it's because you've reconnected with why your story exists. And that's where the words have always lived. Now, if you've done the Dope Writing Personality Quiz, I want to offer you another layer here because I find that each bird type tends to drift in a slightly different way. And the compass lands a little differently depending on how you are wired as a writer. Now, if you're a dove, you tend to drift when the writing has become emotionally exposing and you've quietly pulled back from the truth. Question 1 is your way back in. If you're an owl, you usually lose the thread midway because you've gone so deep into structure and craft that the story has stopped feeling like anything. So sit with question 3. If you're a peacock, the drift almost always means that a newer, shinier idea has been stealing your creative energy from the current manuscript. So question 2 reconnects you with the reader experience and reminds you why this story is worth finishing. And if you're an eagle, you've likely been outrunning the emotional depth in pursuit of momentum. So slow down and start with question 1 before you write another word. Wherever you are, the compass works. Your bird personality type just tells you where to press in first. Now, before your next writing session, I want you to take 10 minutes and answer the 3 compass questions from today's episode. Write them in your notebook or create that voice memo or type them in a document, whatever works for you. Remember, what is my character most afraid of losing? What feeling do I want my reader to leave my story with? And what is this story really about? You don't need to have perfect answers, just honest ones. And let those answers sit with you before you open your manuscript and notice what shifts. If today's episode, my friends, has stirred something in you, don't let that feeling sit. A free clarity call takes 15 minutes and costs you nothing except a little bravery. Head to madisonmichaels.com/call, that's CALL, or find the link in the show notes, and let's talk about your book and how I can help you to finally get it finished. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this episode has helped you, I would love for you to share it with a writer you care about, someone who might also be sitting with a manuscript and they've lost the thread of it and don't know how to find their way back. So send it to them. It could make a real difference. And remember, my friends, you are the vessel for your story. So let the words flow through you and onto the page. Until next time, take care and let's write the book together. My friend, I hope today's episode gave you exactly what you needed for your writing journey. And if it did, would you take 30 seconds to share it with another writer who's struggling to start or finish their book? And if you're loving the show, I'd be so grateful if you left a quick review. It means the world to me and truly makes my day to know that this podcast is helping you. And as you head back into your week, I hope you feel more supported and connected to your creativity. And remember, you're a vessel for the story. So let the words flow through you and onto the page. All right, I'm off to refill my cup of liquid gold and go and do a little writing of my own. Take care, and I'll meet you back here in the next episode of Write the Darn Book.